right, next up we have Ohad from StarkSeoul.
Okay, hey everyone. So I'm Ohad. I'm a product manager at StarkSeoul for the last few years. I worked a lot on StarkNet and the features there. And today I want to discuss with you Volition and why it would push the limits toward cheaper and more efficient L2s than ever before. So I'm going to start with a brief introduction on what is StarkNet, which would be especially brief for this crowd. Then I'll dive right into what Volition is, why we need it, why it's a game changer, and how it's going to work. And I'm going to finish with some examples of how we can build more efficient economical systems using Volition, and why I'm sure that you'll be able to find even better things to do with it as in what I present. So StarkNet is a permissionless validity rollup, L2. It's live on mainnet since November 2021. It's been the first general purpose Zk rollup to be live on mainnet. And I think that, more than my slide, this event shows how vibrant community we have and what adoption we are having. We have a few hundreds projects on StarkNet with more than 1,000 GitHub repositories in Cairo, the StarkNet blockchain native language, and more than $100 million already invested in StarkNet startups. And we focus so far more on developers than on TVL and like TPS, but I think that those numbers are starting to go up quickly as well, with almost 1.5 million smart contracts deployed on our mainnet. And you've seen few selected examples of what amazing projects we have. And if you look on, the lecture by Gil Tudioza, like the lecture of Sam, those projects don't even mimic some stuff that people are using on Ethereum, right? So people really use StarkNet for breaking new things, like to try new things. And obviously we have dozens of regular DeFi applications, gaming applications, everything is like ramping up as StarkNet evolves. So why did so many things came to StarkNet, right? What is basically our promise? So we basically say layer 2s and Zk rollups in particular are like the route for 1000x cheaper transactions, right? Because essentially all users are doing a lot of activity on the L2, and then instead of demanding L1 full nodes to re-execute it for Ethereum security, which is what usually done with Ethereum, we generate very, very succinct and efficient ZK proof as it we then submit to an on-chain verifier contract. And this verification is, again, 100 to 1,000 times cheaper than actually re-execute the transaction, right? Which in turn should leave us to 100 to 1,000x cheaper systems with the same security of Ethereum. So this is how things usually work and how things usually presented. Sad truth is that I lied to you with those numbers, right? Because if you go now to Alta fees and you'll ask, okay, how expensive not only StarkNet but the factor any layer 2 actually is, you'd see much worse numbers in this 100 to 1,000x difference. You'd see 10 to 20 difference between Ethereum and all the L2s, right? And notice that also optimistic rollups that don't even have the proof generation component is also on this list. So what the fuck, right? We have these systems with very, very efficient proving, which I just claimed to be 100 to 1,000x cheaper. Why we are stuck at that 10 to 20x level of improvement compared to Ethereum? So the reason is on-chain data availability, because essentially it's not enough to convince you all that my transactions are correct. I need to do something more. So let's take a concrete example. Assuming I have 2 ETH and I want to deliver them to you. So proof would mean that no one can take my ETH without me signing on a valid transaction that we didn't transfer the money to you. So no one can steal the money. But this is not enough, right? Because let's say that the StarkNet sequencer, or whenever we are decentralized, the entire StarkNet sequencer would go down. No one would know what my state is. And how can I would ever be able to retrieve it from the network, right? Even if everything is permissionless, I lost access to the state. I can't work with it. So essentially, if we want people to really, if we want StarkNet to really have Ethereum level of security, we must report the entire data of StarkNet to L1, right? Because again, if we don't do it, then there is a freezing risk. The way we do it is basically within each and every proof, we take all the things that have been chained in the StarkNet state. For example, in the 2 ETH sending example, I have now 1 ETH. So we'll say Ethereum, look, Ohad's address in the ETH contract of StarkNet, now it's not 2, it's 1. And someone else, it's not 3, it's now 4, right? So we'll tell basically L1 the entire state so people can reconstruct it and build it. And when we think about, okay, sorry, so I actually refer to this slide as well. So this process is expensive because, it's only 16 guys per byte to tell, to inform L1 on a new byte, but it means that it's 500 guys or a bit more for you into 56. And if you go to the transfer example, right, I just sent 1 ETH, so my balance is changed, right, and the balance of the recipient has been changed, and we both need, we have new addresses, new balances, there is some node, there is some fee, right, those things accumulate. You can see how even a very simple transfer, right, due to data availability alone, could accumulate, and indeed this is the state today, to like thousands of gas. So if you look currently on StarkNet, data availability is more than 90% of the network gas fees right now for Ethereum, right? So like the proof, these things that we, people first think when they say, oh, it's complicated because I have to verify proof, that's less than 10%. So what are we going to do? So let's go back for a second and dive deeper into the why we actually need to publish data on Ethereum, right? What we say is basically this. We have some state on Ethereum, right? People really work hard to create this state, and we want this state, say, if the system is frozen, 1-2 days later, we want to know what the state is so we can reconstruct it and do some operations with it. And this is a very sound intuition. The problem is that it doesn't hold for all use cases. Let's start with a concrete example. Say that we want to buy on StarkNet really, really cheap NFTs, right? Like 1-2 cents worth of NFTs. It doesn't make sense to tell Ethereum, look, Ohad just have this new NFT that's worth 1 cent, right? Because telling it to Ethereum, I would pay more than 1 cent just on the fact that I tell it to Ethereum. So obviously some users' choices would differ here, right? But it's expected that many users that now buy 1 cent worth NFTs would say, you know what, I'm fine with this risk, right? It's okay to me to assume that StarkNet would continue to function and that my state would be preserved and, to be exposed to some more risk because I just paid 1 cent to buy NFT and it doesn't make sense that I would pay another 10 cents on the gas price for telling L1 that I have this NFT. So this is like one intuition, right? But if you think about it, you'd find out that similar things happen actually within each and every transaction, right? Because assume that I now buy an expensive NFT, right? A really cool NFT. So I would like to report it to Ethereum, right? That I now have very cool NFT with like thousands of dollars worth. And obviously, the seller of the NFT would like to update his balance, which is now much more significant on Ethereum. But something else happened when we processed this transaction, right? I like send 2 cents of fee to the operator. And let's say I took this 2 cents from like expenditure account, right? That have like 5 cents or $5 and is only tailored to pay fees on the network, right? So again, this is account that have $5 and potentially I'm not very careful about if those $5 are going to be available because they're just $5 and the L1 transaction to retrieve it from the network could be like around $5 cost, right? On the other hand, if this $5 used to pay that, without reporting to Ethereum whenever it is changed, then my entire transaction stream would be much, much more efficient, right? So we've seen use cases where not using Ethereum level of data availability makes sense, right? But there are cases where it's not only makes sense economical, it just redundant to have Ethereum data availability. Let's move to a much more broader use, to a relatively broader use example, which is Oracle price reporting, right? We want Starknet to be very, very efficient for DeFi. And this means we want a lot of Oracle price reporting on-chain, right? So assume we have an Oracle that pushes to Starknet every, 300 milliseconds a new price for Bitcoin. So now if I have this transaction, right, that updates the Bitcoin price, what is the logic to tell the new Bitcoin price from this transaction to Ethereum? Right, because in 300 milliseconds, I would have another price, right? It's very, very, very volatile, right? It is not meant to be consumed by people that would listen to the data that is published on Ethereum, right? This data is meant to be consumed by StarkNet applications, right? That are consuming it real time. And if now I can allow myself much, much cheaper price reporting, right, which can translate to much more frequent price reporting, I just boosted the economical efficiency of the entire system, right? And you could say to the Oracle company, okay, so assume that we could do it, and I'll show you later how we can do it. HappyFlow just reports the data to StarkNet, right, without publishing it anywhere. You know what? If something happens, continue to publish it to StarkNet, but now back up the data. So everything is always retrievable for the StarkNet applications, but in the HappyFlow, things are just much, much cheaper. And similar thing, like redundant data that is just not very relevant, also happens with each and every transaction. Because each and every transaction updates the nonce of the sender, right? This is the way nonce work. They are there to ensure the transactions are being executed in order, right? But if you go back to the motivation, right, of, oh no, the state is frozen, we need to reconstruct it, would user care what was the nonce of their transaction, right? They care about their balance, they want to retrieve it. No one would say, oh look, but my nonce was 5, right? So with this intuition, much like the Oracle use case, we can say, okay, let's work with like one nonce struct off-chain, right? So nonce is like advancing, and we have transaction 44, 55, 56, and so on. If we see suddenly that things stop working, right, because this data is unavailable and transaction fail, we can always revert back to on-chain data availability, right? And then switch to a second track of nonce that would allow my transaction to still get into the network in a bit more expensive way because the cheap way is now unavailable. So if we are like doing a short recap of what we've seen till now, we saw that putting data availability on-chain is very, very, very crucial, right? And we can't claim we have a term level of security, which is like what we're doing here in the first place, without it. But we also saw multiple examples where this is an overkill, right? Which it's either an overkill because it's just more costly than the operation we try to secure, or it's an overkill because it doesn't make sense and data is extremely volatile and we actually don't need it available on Ethereum for a long time. So obviously we have a lot of motivation to put the price down for on-chain data availability. And for those of you that are aware of what's happening on the Ethereum ecosystem, you may be wondering, okay, but there is Ethereum improvement proposal 4844 coming up. Why it's not the dream solution to all the problems you just described? So first, EIP 4844 basically means we attach a bit more data blocks to each and every Ethereum block, which creates de facto like a secondary market for data availability that is supposedly be cheaper. I have two problems with this, with like using this EIP and be done with it. The first problem is that it creates a secondary market that is cheaper, right? But this means that across the board, like rollups would be cheaper because again, data availability is actually the majority of the cost for all of them. So there would be more activity in the rollups, more data to report on, and the price would go back up, right? So obviously it will be cheaper than Ethereum, but we can't like say, okay, we are sure it's like the 10, 50x improvement we were waiting for long term. But I think that the more inherent reason why those solutions can't be good enough is that we see a distinction in various needs of people, right? If I have $1 million, I want to use the most secure way so everyone would know that I have $1 million, right? And if I buy an NFT worth cent, I shouldn't care where it's backed up, right? It's a cent. So it doesn't make sense to use the entire, take the entire scale of use cases and use the same solution with all of them, right? We need to differ. We need to say, okay, some use cases would get the most expensive solution, most secure solutions. Yes. Okay. Okay. Is this better? Oh. Should I go back from the beginning? Did you hear anything? Okay, I'll do a brave try to continue from here, but feel free to ask questions. Okay, so we saw that there is no like one use case fits all need, right? Some stuff need to be backed up by a very like relatively very expensive on-chain data availability. For other use cases, it doesn't make sense. So we took those observations and we squeezed them into the next version of StarkNet, version 0.13, which we call Volition. This would mean that developers can flexibly choose the data availability mode for each variable in their code. So potentially one smart contract could have many data availability routes for many variables, right? And this would mean that you control which variable holds a very, very critical information and should be backed by Ethereum, and which variable is not, and it's okay to have much, much cheaper operations on it. And what we made sure when designing this feature, and we'll soon see how it works, is that basically things don't propagate, right? Because if we were to naively take StarkNet and say, okay, we just don't report some data on-chain, it would basically mean that, you know, the data that we don't report on-chain would interrupt and collide the data we do report on-chain. So what we made sure is that if, for example, now we have a crisis and StarkNet no longer have the data that is only backed up by StarkNet, people that use StarkNet but made sure that Ethereum backs the entire state would continue to work seamlessly. They wouldn't care. They are guaranteed to be able to withdraw their money without any interruptions. So let's see how it would all work and how we will change the StarkNet basically framework to support this feature. So we are going to have basically two trees. So right now the StarkNet state is just one tree that contains everything. And we plan to have multiple trees, one tree for each data availability solution, initially two trees. So we have here the L1 data availability, that is, you know, every change on it is reported to Ethereum, much like the state we have today. And we'll add a new tree. This would be the L2 data availability, where data is only backed up by StarkNet. And you know, if something changes here, it will not be reported to Ethereum. And basically, whenever you declare a variable, you say, I want this variable to be stored on the right, and this variable to be stored on the left, right? So like one smart contract have like bits and bytes of its representation across both trees. And whenever you read or write to a variable, you access the relevant tree in order to read or write its value. So what happens here is that it achieves all the qualities I just described before, right? Because basically, if now this tree goes away, we don't have anymore the only StarkNet-backed data availability tree. Things here still work, right? I can continue to read and write variables from here. I can continue to update L1 about any changes made here. So if, for example, my balance of $1 million was saved here, and I like kept sure to use the L1 data availability, and now things here collapse and I get frustrated, I can withdraw my balance, right? Which is what we want to really ensure in this design. And notice that we will develop it in such a way in the Cairo language, so it encourages developers to use like optimistically off-chain data availability method, right? Because if I go back to the oracles or nonce examples, right? So those developers can write their applications in the following way, which is very interesting. They could say, normally I save my price here, right, in L2 data availability 3, which is very, very, very cheap. This is what I access all the time. But I have the ability, for example, if some administrator sign on it, to start to refer to this variable in the L1 data availability area, right? So I still write in the same contract, and I explore the same interface, and day-to-day things are extremely cheap, but I'm continue to be serviceable to all the applications that use me, even if some data availability crises happen, right? So this is like massive flexibility and cost reduction without any security compromise for those use cases. And we'll do similar things with nonces. So like nonces of accounts will be able to choose data availability method. Normally, it would be off-chain data availability, but they can move to on-chain. And going forward, new data availability method will be able to add it if, like, you know, the StarkNet governance inside on it. We have this for like data availability committee, data availability, or maybe we'll do some integrations with data availability solutions such as Filecoin and Celestia and stuff like this, all to offer like the greatest flexibility that we can offer. So developers can put themselves on this line between on Ethereum and most expensive to only on StarkNet and the cheapest. So let's discuss how we expect people to actually use it. Let's see what I call like the ERC20 of tomorrow. So let's assume we have a USDC contract, right? And this one contract can contain variables for multiple data availability approaches. So it has some users and applications that chose their balance to be off-chain and some that chose their balance to be on-chain. And now when someone do like a transfer operation on this contract, this contract would ask itself, okay, what's the data availability method that was chosen by the sender, right? And what was the data availability mode chosen by the receiver? And it would, update the relevant variables with the relevant data availability modes inside this contract, right? So the AMM or DeFi application that called this contract didn't have to mind itself with the data availability method that the users chose, right? The interfaces would still be the same, but for those users that chose to make cost optimizations, things would become much, much, much cheaper. And I think that, the way we approach Volition is very much reflective of the way we approach any other feature in StarkNet. Because what we basically say, let's take the best ideas that are around the ecosystem, not only of StarkNet, but also on Ethereum, and see how we can leverage them into something that would maximize the flexibility of developers and invite the best developers to really use this power and harvest the best applications they can. And another feature with this spirit that already been us for quite a while is account abstraction. So basically, just in a nutshell, account abstraction, which is already on StarkNet, means that you can be truly flexible with how your transactions look like in terms of, signature management and soon also nonce management and so on. And like, when we came out with this feature, we're like, okay, it's cool. So like some use cases would use like StarkNet native signatures, which are the cheapest, and others maybe would be Ethereum compatible, and others may do like an MPC like account with multi-sigs. But we didn't think that this would allow users to be able to authenticate with their fingerprints, for example, which is what one StarkNet wallet is doing. Right? We didn't have it in mind, and the developer community came and like extended this flexibility to something that we didn't think is possible before. And now it's like a really amazing thing that attracts more developers and more users to the ecosystem. So basically, I'm excited, right? Because this new area of flexibility would be introduced in 0.13. Currently, we aim it to be on like the second half of Q3. And I wonder what can you build on StarkNet with this amazing flexibility, which would be very scaled, and this amazing community that we have. Thank you. Questions? Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. I never asked this, but is there any plan to have like data availability by default on something like Celestia or Avail, like some type of default thing?
Yeah.
Or?
So essentially, we want to be as flexible as we can, right? Because obviously, even if we have Celestia integration, just on StarkNet would be cheaper. I think that the major obstacle towards such integrations is actually the consensus algorithm. For example, if you have Google sign on everything, you can say something like, I expect Google to sign up. It has all the data of block n by like block n+1. With Celestia and Filecoin, the problem is that it takes much longer before you get an attestation that the data is there. And by then, it's like, too late to do reorg to the network. It would be very disruptive. So we still need to see exactly how we tailor those integrations, but this is the reason they aren't trivial. But like, yeah, we want to have it. It's just a more long-term goal. Anyone else? Okay, thank you.